Tom, thanks for your time.
Thanks for having me.
I want to get your take on what's happening in the US right now with compostable packaging. As you know, recently the USDA National Organic Standards Board decided to not recommend compostable packaging, ruling that it doesn't meet organic standards. And this seems a little counter to what's being written into some of the extended producer responsibility laws that we're seeing at the state level here in the United States. But overall, it just sounds like compostable packaging is struggling a bit. Is this true?
I believe it is, but I want to preface that where, as TerraCycle, we have expertise is really what happens in the end of life of these materials. So whether, the sales for compostable packaging are up or down, I have no idea, right? What I would say, though, is the general challenge of compostable packaging is that while the claims are technically true, because they have to be validated in laboratory settings, on whether it's home compostable or industrially compostable, composters generally don't want this stuff, which are the actual end-of-life managers, if you will. They will decide whether that package will be composted or not at the very end. And the reason they don't like it is because while it technically can degrade, it doesn't flow through their process well for a number of clear and sort of unclear reasons. So if I may to expand on that, before compostable packaging came onto the scene, an average industrial composter was getting about 7% contamination in their feedstock. So think, it's the garbage bag you put your leaves into. It's the random plastic fork that got mixed in with the food, right? And that was about 7%. And that 7% is bad because they have to spend money to sort that out and spend money then to dispose it. So of course, the goal is always to make it below 7%. When compostable packaging came onto the scene, what happened is contamination went up from 7%, went up to 300% more, to about greater than 20%, because folks were now putting in all these compostable plastics, but potentially also mixing in a little bit more of non-compostable. And here's the problem for a composter. When all this comes in wet food waste or degrading material, it's not like in a recycling plant where you can then easily sort it out because it's dry waste and large object sizes like detergent bottles and soda bottles. This is forks and flexible films mixed in with rotting food waste and yard clippings. You don't know what is what. It's the composter can't tell the difference between a petrochemical fork and a home compostable fork or an industrially compostable fork. For them, it all looks the same, which is why contamination went from 7% to 21%. Now, that sucks for composters. They just became less efficient by 300%. Then they have
the end product, the compost, is their product that they sell. And if the quality of that goes down, I would just imagine sales go down.
Right, exactly. So now you are dealing with 300% more contamination, which you have to spend money to remove. Your output, has less volume because, by that growth. And once you've sorted it out and you have now a pile of sort of gross plastics and whatnot, gross meaning like covered in rotting food and so on, are you going to spend money to clean it and then to sort it out when the output value of compostable plastics is 0? You're not. So that all just gets thrown away. And that's the core issue, is while compostable packaging is technically degradable, it is not practically composted because of this foundational challenge for the actual operators. And then some will say, oh, but what about home composting? I've never met a home composter who actually wants to compost this stuff in their home compost pile, right?
It takes longer to degrade than organic.
And the thing to remember in home composting is home compost piles, like my own at home, are not efficiently managed. It's just a pile of stuff you throw. So that's not, maybe won't get the temperature, maybe won't, it'll go much slower. And in those environments, putting in a bunch of packaging is not going to be helpful, which is why home composters generally don't home compost compostable packaging. And that becomes the key issue. It's this huge delta between what technically can occur and what practically occurs.
The brand owners, though, who have mandates for sustainable packaging, whether through an EPR law or a internal sustainability goal, they have to have some end-of-life plan. And for food companies, compostable packaging did make a little bit of sense because of the food contamination. That packaging material typically wasn't easily recyclable, couldn't be
Yeah.
recycled. So compost was, the next best plan. But with all these recent activities here with compostable packaging, do you think some brands are going to be walking away from compostable
Yeah.
packaging?
Well, I want to first address the first part of the point, right? Which is if you're a brand, generally speaking, the mantra has been, I need to make my packaging recyclable, reusable, or compostable. That's been the general mantra.
Yep.
To improve from maybe my status quo is non-recyclable. That's my starting point. Now let's break each of these apart because you'll see why compostable is exciting. And it's not necessarily exciting because it's a good end of life. It's exciting because it's cheap and easy. So in recyclable, why is your package, if you're starting with a non-recyclable package, why is it not recyclable? It's because it's not profitable for recyclers to bother recycling it. The cost of collecting it and processing it is greater than what you would recover at the end. So what could you do if you wanted to move your package to be recyclable? Either you could invest more money in the package, so the value of the outcome is greater than the cost of collecting and processing it. That would mean your price goes up on every package you produce. Maybe instead of making it from flexible film, you now make it from rigid PET as an example. That's going to dramatically increase your cost of production. So people don't like to do that. Noting the big megatrend in package design is the inverse. It's actually to make packaging cheaper tomorrow than today. So that would be like swimming uphill. The next option would be like what a TerraCycle does is pay a company like a TerraCycle to collect and recycle the packaging, where you'd be paying for every package collected what it really costs to collect it and process it minus what the results are worth. That is also an extra cost, net. So that's on recyclable. The only things you can do, increase cost, right? So that's why they are like swimming uphill a little bit. The second choice is reusable, and reusable plays the best in packaging that is already generally expensive per liter or kilo of what it contains. Where we run France's biggest reuse system with Loop, there the packages that do the best are these more expensive packages. Think wine bottles, whiskey bottles, heavy plastic like laundry detergent bottles, and so on. Those are the most conducive to reuse economically and environmentally. The cheap packages where this not recyclability issue exists are not that conducive to reuse anyway. So reuse becomes impractical for that type of package that starts as non-recyclable. Now,
Right.
if you move to
For reuse, you do need something that's durable and
correct,
will withstand the
right.
cycles. Yep.
So think about it this way. If you're a wine producer, you can use your existing wine bottle. You're a pickle producer, you can use your existing pickle jar. But if you're a chip bag producer, you would have to come up with a much more expensive, durable vessel. You couldn't just use a flexible film. So then you move to compostable. Why is compostable so alluring to these companies? Because at effectively just shifting from a petrochemical film to a compostable film, you could probably keep your costs pretty same. It's the exact same production. So you're just doing that switch and now you can claim compostable. That's why it's so exciting for brands, because they can accomplish this shift with the least amount of cost and potentially next to no incremental cost. The problem is the white elephant in the room is the composters don't want this stuff anyway. But the public perception around compostable is very strong. The average citizen thinks it's great because they're not aware that the industrial composters don't want it.
Well, that does seem to be the
Oh,
elephant
and
in the
by the way,
room,
sorry to
as you
interrupt your
say.
point. You
Yep.
mentioned
Yeah.
EPR at the beginning. Why do you think it's in the
Yes.
EPR regulation? Is because what is the arc of all regulation in the world? These versus corporates. The arc is corporates try to make sure there's no regulation. And if they can't succeed in lobbying against the regulation's existence, then it's about let's control the regulation, right? Let's sort of co-opt it and own it, right? And that's what happens where EPR is happening, is that the corporates then say, okay, we can't block it, but so let's really push it. And they write in, things like compostable, because that reinforces the point I just shared.
Right. I see the logic in all of that, but it's hard to get past the point that the ultimate goal of sustainable packaging and the ultimate goal of the extended producer responsibility laws is to promote circularity. And there's that tiny little bit of, loop at the bottom there that is broken
Yeah.
for compostable
Well,
packaging, and that's hard to
compostable
get
is
by.
the biggest circular loop, right? Like if you think of
Yes.
circularity, the goal is the tightest circle. The tightest circle is reuse, right? Where you just clean and refill. Then recycling, where you at least recover the material for that same material purpose, right? That doesn't necessarily
Hmm.
mean package to package, it means plastic to plastic, right? Compostable, you're going all the way back down to soil to regrow the the plant that would then produce a compostable polymer. It's the biggest open circle in circularity overall,
Hmm.
and I think you are correct that that is the underlying stated goal of EPR, but the goal of corporates versus sustainability is to solve the issue with the least amount of spend.
Understood. Okay, so um, Tom, we've talked about the different types of end of life options, and you've mentioned reusable a couple of times.
Yeah,
Obviously, this is your wheelhouse.
sure.
Um, but you said you didn't think brands would necessarily walk away from compostable packaging just because of the reality that the industrial composters don't want it,
Yes.
and most home composters don't want it either. But there's only so many options for the end of life. Do you think that reusable packaging is going to increase either as or if compostable packaging is considered by the brands less often? And then maybe
It's a really
why
good
or why
question.
not?
I want to give maybe two different lenses at this, if I may.
Sure.
So
Hmm.
first, our knowledge base on reuse is, TerraCycle runs Loop, which is a pre-fill reuse platform. And just to bring everyone up to speed, we've invested close to $50 million in this platform. So we put a major effort against it, running pilots with the biggest brands and biggest retailers in Canada, US, UK, France, and Japan. I mention that because only France have we been able to move out of pilot into industrial scale. But today we run France's biggest reuse system, shipping over 400 products and that are beverage, food, home care, personal care, and miscellaneous like meat trays and things of that nature. Why has France been able to really scale while all these other developed markets have not is because of the regulatory environment in France. France is both mandating reuse and subsidizing it. And those two carrots and sticks don't exist in these other markets, though it is emerging in Western Europe and the UK, and you'll see more movement there. So I first want to highlight reuse needs the invisible hand of regulation. It does not function in a completely free market system. You need that push. So that's the sort of first lens to be very aware of. The second is where is reuse really good environmentally and economically, and where is it not good environmentally and economically? Now, imagine, if you will, for a moment, a spectrum where you put every package form on a line, and the line from left to right is on one end, it's the cheapest way to package a kilo or liter of content. And on the other side, it's the most expensive way to package a kilo or liter of content. So the expensive examples would be perfume bottles, wine bottles. Then you would get to things like big rigid plastics, cat litter tubs, margarine containers, laundry detergent containers. And on the other end, it would be flexible films. Now, why compostable is coming from the cheap side and reuse is coming from the expensive side? Why? Because reuse is really good economically and environmentally for the bottom third of that spectrum, from the most expensive to about a third out. Their reuse will win all the time. It's better for the environment, better economically to, collect and just clean those vessels than to make a new one. From your wine bottle to your perfume bottle to your pickle jar, 100% works there. It does not work economically or environmentally for moving a flexible film into a reusable vessel. It just doesn't. The flexible film will always be environmentally and economically more efficient, even if it's not recycled at the end of its life. Now, what compostable packaging really, where you see it showing up, is in that sort of quadrant, if you will, is in the really cheap packages, moving from cheap non-recyclable petrochemical to compostable. I put that in quotes. It's technically compostable versions of the exact same thing. So these two don't really come, like they're coming from these two different spectrums on where there is theoretical relevance. So you don't really see. I've never seen a package choice competing between should I go compostable or should I go reusable, right? They're just coming from those two different ends. But let's be very aware that reuse needs that invisible hand that France has done a wonderful job in enabling. And without it,
Mhm.
it's going to be very difficult to get corporates to lean in, because reuse is, no matter what, some level of incremental work. You have to have the health and safety muscle for a used vessel coming back into your operation. Without empirical incrementality, you are, not a shampoo company inventing conditioner, which is incremental. You are a shampoo company making your shampoo bottle better.
Understood. Thanks, Tom, for explaining all the ins and outs of that. I came into this conversation with the thought that if compostable packaging is having trouble and starts to decline, something else has to take its place there at the end of life. And basically what I think I've heard you say is that compostable packaging technically maybe isn't working as designed, but it still works from the letter of the law point of view.
Yes.
And then,
And then just to really, it is technically, correct, but practically incorrect, right? So in other words,
yes,
if you're a consumer buying a compostable package, it's not a lie what's on the label. It will compost in an industrial or home setting. It just, the people who run those systems don't want it, so it never will actually see composting occur.
right.
And I think where this, will shake out is this statement being validated more like what you said earlier, with like the USDA and so on, where, authorities, sort of validate that statement and say, yes, that's true. And as a result, we should view this packaging form differently.
Okay. So maybe we just need a little bit more time to see how it all shakes out. But again, one of my suppositions coming into the conversation that if compostables go down, other things would come up, recyclability, reusability, and that's where I kind of wanted to get your the take on the
Yeah, and
reusable
I think
packaging side.
just to double click on that, I think let's project 5 years out, right?
Sure.
More, of these examples, like you have private companies having this public view, like Tesco banning compostable packaging, 6 years ago from their stores because of this, all the way to, the example that you shared earlier. That will, likely decline compostable packaging. Again, compostable packaging plays in that very sort of, economically efficient package area. So I think what will supersede it will be probably more recycling choices. And that could, I think, be two in flexible film, moving from multi-layer to monolayer, and maybe through EPR funding and other methods, seeing if that could potentially flow through, municipal systems. That just requires a lot of funding to achieve it. And the technical move from multi-layer to monolayer. But there are some glimmers there that might occur, or private systems like a TerraCycle doing the same, but it's the same sort of effect. I think that's where you're going to see more movement at that spectrum of the package, of the packaging spectrum. And on the expensive packaging, as compostable falls off, I think you will see tailwind to reuse. The important thing to note is, again, that compostable attacks packaging from the cheaper side and reuse attacks packaging from the expensive side. But there's still going to be a tailwind effect there because a choice will have inevitably been eliminated.
Right. Excellent. Tom, as always, I appreciate your insights and enjoy talking with you. Thanks for your time.
I do too. Thank you, Lisa.